When you stay silent for too long, something begins to shift in the dynamic between you and the people around you. Silence might feel like the safe choice at first. It avoids conflict, it keeps the peace, and it spares you from uncomfortable conversations. But the reality is that silence doesn't just protect peace. It often destroys it slowly and quietly. When you don't express what you truly feel, you leave room for others to create their own story, and that's where misunderstanding begins to grow. People don't live in your head. They don't know your thoughts, your boundaries, or your pain unless you share it. By staying quiet, you allow them to assume, and those assumptions rarely match the truth. Think about it. When you're upset with someone but choose to stay silent, they might believe nothing is wrong. They go on with life as if everything is fine, while inside you're carrying frustration, disappointment, or even heartbreak. Over time, that unspoken truth creates a gap between you and them. The longer you let that silence linger, the bigger the gap becomes. Suddenly, you find yourself feeling disconnected from people you once felt close to, not because they intentionally pushed you away, but because your silence made it impossible for them to understand where you stood. Relationships thrive on communication, whether it's romantic, friendships, or family. Without it, assumptions take over. If you don't speak up, someone might think you don't care. If you don't express gratitude, they might assume their efforts mean nothing. If you don't voice your boundaries, they might unknowingly cross them and leave you feeling disrespected. Silence creates a false reality where the other person is living in comfort while you're quietly breaking down. And that imbalance eventually cracks the foundation of any connection. What makes silence even more dangerous is that it feels like control at first. You tell yourself, I won't say anything because I don't want to start a fight, or it's better if I just let it go. But in truth, silence is often fear dressed up as peace. It's the fear of rejection, the fear of confrontation, the fear of not being understood. And while you stay quiet, you're not actually avoiding pain. You're just trading immediate discomfort for long-term damage. The words you don't speak today become the regrets you carry tomorrow. The longer you remain silent, the harder it becomes to break it. You start building walls instead of bridges. The other person, unaware of what's really going on, may continue behaving in ways that hurt you, not out of malice, but out of ignorance. And by the time you finally do decide to speak, the buildup of unspoken emotions often explodes in a way that feels overwhelming and out of proportion. What could have been solved with one honest conversation now feels like an unfixable mess. Silence also impacts the way people perceive you. When you consistently keep your feelings and opinions to yourself, others begin to think you don't have any. They start assuming you're fine with whatever happens, and soon they stop considering your perspective altogether. That's how silence leads to being overlooked, undervalued, and even taken for granted. People respect those who are willing to voice their truth. They may not always like what you say, but they will respect the courage it takes to say it. At the same time, silence affects your own sense of identity. Each time you bite your tongue instead of speaking your truth, you chip away at your self-respect. You start to feel like your feelings don't matter, like your voice isn't important. And if you let that pattern continue long enough, you begin to lose touch with yourself. You stop recognizing who you are because you've become someone who stays quiet even when your soul is screaming for you to speak. But perhaps the most painful part of staying silent for too long is the realization that you robbed yourself of the chance to be understood. People can't meet needs they don't know exist. They can't respect boundaries that were never expressed. They can't appreciate the weight of your silence if you never gave them the gift of your truth. By keeping quiet, you deny others the opportunity to rise to the occasion, to show they care, to adjust, to grow alongside you. And in the end, You're left with loneliness not because people didn't care, but because they didn't know how to. When you finally decide to break the silence, everything begins to shift. Speaking your truth doesn't guarantee that people will respond the way you want, but it does guarantee clarity. It removes the fog of assumptions and creates space for honesty. And with honesty, you either grow stronger connections or you realize who doesn't deserve to be in your life. Both outcomes are wins because they bring peace rooted in truth rather than silence built on fear. And that's why staying silent for too long is never the solution. It only builds walls where bridges could have been formed. When you stay silent about the things that matter to you, you might think you're keeping the peace, but in reality, you're setting yourself up for something far heavier: resentment. Bottled emotions never disappear. They don't dissolve just because you keep them inside. Instead, they sink deeper into you, stacking layer after layer until the weight becomes unbearable. Silence feels harmless in the moment because it avoids conflict, but it builds a storm within you that eventually comes out in ways you can't always control. Think about the times you've chosen to swallow your feelings when someone crossed a line. Maybe it was a comment that disrespected you. Maybe it was behavior that hurt you. Or maybe it was something you deeply disagreed with. You told yourself it's not worth saying anything, or I'll just let it go. But did it really go away? No. What happens is that moment gets stored in your memory, and every time something similar occurs, it adds to the pile. The frustration builds, the irritation multiplies, and soon you're not just upset about one thing. You're upset about everything. This is how resentment takes root. It doesn't explode immediately. It simmers beneath the surface. At first, it shows up in subtle ways. You feel distant from the person you once felt close to. You withdraw little by little, not because you want to, but because you're protecting yourself from the emotions you never voice. Then it starts to show up in your tone, in your energy, and even in your body language. You may say nothing with your words, but your silence becomes louder than anything you could speak. Resentment also changes the way you see people. Instead of viewing them as they are, you start seeing them through the filter of your unspoken frustrations. Every little thing they do begins to irritate you because it reminds you of all the things you never addressed. You stop appreciating their good qualities because the pain of your silence has made the negatives overshadow everything else. Over time, what was once a strong bond begins to feel like a prison. And it's not because they are entirely wrong. It's because you never gave them a chance to know your truth. The tragedy of bottled emotions is that they often turn into explosions. After months or even years of silence, one small incident can trigger an outburst that seems way out of proportion to the situation. But it's not about that one moment. It's about all the moments that came before it, the ones you buried instead of addressing. That's when people are left confused, asking, "Why are you so angry all of a sudden?" They don't realize that the explosion isn't sudden at all. It's the result of silence that was stretched too long. Another painful effect of bottling emotions is that resentment doesn't just stay directed at others. It also turns inward. When you consistently silence yourself, you start to resent yourself for not having the courage to speak. You replay situations in your mind, wishing you had spoken up, wishing you had said something, wishing you had set a boundary. That self-betrayal stings the most because deep down, you know you abandoned your own voice. Over time, that erodes your self-respect and leaves you feeling powerless. When resentment takes hold, it doesn't just affect one relationship. It spills into every area of your life. You may carry that frustration into work, into friendships, and even into new relationships. You build walls to protect yourself, but those walls also block genuine connection. You start believing that people will never understand you, when in truth you never gave them the opportunity to. It's also worth noting that resentment is toxic because it's silent poison. Unlike anger, which is visible and can be addressed, resentment hides beneath the surface. It looks calm on the outside, but burns on the inside, and the longer it burns, the more it eats away at love, trust, and respect. That's why so many relationships don't fall apart because of massive betrayals. They collapse because of small issues left unspoken that grew into mountains of bitterness. The cure to resentment isn't to shout, argue, or blame. The cure is honest communication. It's learning to express your truth in the moment rather than burying it. That doesn't mean being rude or harsh. It means being clear, calm, and direct, saying, "That hurt me," or "I don't feel comfortable with this," or "I need you to understand where I'm coming from." By voicing your feelings, you not only release the burden from your chest, but you also give the other person a chance to correct their behavior, to understand you, and to meet you halfway. When you choose to break the pattern of silence, you protect both yourself and your relationships. You stop letting emotions rot inside you, and instead, you create space for healing and resolution. You'll be surprised how much lighter you feel when you say what's been sitting on your chest. You'll also be surprised how often people respond with understanding when you finally give them the chance to. Resentment thrives in silence, but it dies in truth. And when you learn to speak your truth instead of bottling it up, you reclaim your peace, your respect, and your power. And that is why bottled emotions always turn into resentment if you stay silent for too long. When you choose silence for too long, one of the most damaging consequences is the way it affects the respect others have for you. Respect is not given freely. It is earned and maintained by the way you carry yourself, the standards you set, and the boundaries you enforce. When people see that you don't speak up, that you allow disrespect or hurtful behavior without addressing it, they slowly begin to lose the sense of value they once had for you. They may not even do it consciously, but the message your silence sends is clear. My feelings don't matter enough to defend. And when you broadcast that message, others start to believe it too. Silence in the face of mistreatment doesn't look like patience. It looks like weakness. If someone crosses a line and you say nothing, you're teaching them that it's acceptable to cross it again. People don't respect boundaries that aren't communicated, and they don't respect people who don't stand up for themselves. Even if you think you're avoiding conflict, what you're really doing is giving silent permission for the behavior to continue. Over time, this dynamic becomes a cycle you tolerate. They take advantage, and your respect in their eyes diminishes with each silent moment. It's not just about major situations either. Even in the small moments, silence chips away at respect. If you consistently let others interrupt you, dismiss your ideas, or minimize your feelings, you're training them to see your voice as unimportant. Respect isn't only built through big stands. It's built through everyday expressions of self-worth. The way you handle the little things communicates volumes about how you expect to be treated. When you let those small moments slide over and over, people unconsciously conclude that you don't value yourself enough to demand better. Silence also makes people believe you lack confidence. Confidence is magnetic, and one of its clearest expressions is the ability to speak your truth. When you hold back, when you hesitate, when you swallow your words, it signals uncertainty. People respect clarity even when they disagree with what you say. They respect someone who is willing to stand firm in their beliefs because it shows strength. But if you constantly choose silence, they start to see you as unsure, passive, or easily controlled. And respect cannot thrive in the absence of strength. The truth is, respect is tied to boundaries. Boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are guidelines that teach others how to love and value you. But a boundary unspoken is a boundary non-existent. If someone continually oversteps and you say nothing, they assume no line was crossed. Silence doesn't protect the relationship, it erodes it. Because when you let someone continue patterns that hurt you, resentment builds within you and disrespect grows within them. Eventually, the connection breaks, not because of one big moment, but because silence allowed 1,000 small moments to go unchecked. Another painful reality is that when you don't speak up, people may even begin to test you. Human nature often pushes limits to see how far they can go. If you never draw the line, the tests become bigger. It's not necessarily malicious, it's just how people operate. But if they see you accept mistreatment or disrespect without reaction, they learn that they can treat you however they like and face no consequences. That doesn't inspire respect, it inspires exploitation. It's important to understand that speaking up isn't about being aggressive or confrontational. It's not about shouting or dominating others. True strength lies in calm, firm communication, saying, "I won't accept that," or "I need you to treat me with respect," or "that's not okay with me," is powerful not because it's loud, but because it's clear. Clarity earns respect. People may not always like hearing it, but they will always recognize the strength it takes to express it. Silence, on the other hand, leaves people guessing. And when people guess, they rarely guess in your favor. They assume you're fine with being overlooked, dismissed, or minimized. They assume you don't mind being last on the priority list. And little by little, you fade into the background of their life not because you lack value, but because you never demanded the respect you deserve. Respect in relationships, whether romantic, family, or friendships, is the foundation of trust and love. Without it, everything else crumbles, and the fastest way to lose respect is to consistently silence yourself when it matters most. You don't lose respect because you're too kind or too forgiving. You lose it because people see that you don't value yourself enough to enforce your worth. But the moment you decide to stop staying quiet, everything shifts. When you begin to voice your truth, people may be surprised at first, maybe even uncomfortable, but over time they'll learn that you are not someone who can be walked over, that your silence is no longer permission, and that your voice matters. And the ones who truly care will rise to meet that standard, because respect flows naturally toward those who respect themselves. And that is why silence, when stretched too long, causes people to lose respect for you. When you stay silent for too long, one of the most damaging consequences is the way it shapes your identity in the eyes of others. People don't just listen to what you say, they also pay attention to what you don't say. And when you consistently keep your thoughts, feelings, and perspectives hidden, the image people form of you becomes incomplete and often inaccurate. Instead of being seen as a strong, confident individual with depth, personality, and clear values, you risk being seen as passive, indifferent, or someone who simply doesn't matter in the bigger picture. Over time, silence erases the unique presence that makes you who you are, until you're treated like a background character in your own life. The reality is that every relationship, whether personal or professional, thrives on communication. Communication is how we build connection, trust, and understanding. But when you choose silence as your default mode, people don't get the chance to know you for who you really are. They only see fragments, assumptions, or projections of what they think you might be. And in the absence of your voice, others often fill in the blanks themselves, and not always in ways that reflect your truth. They may think you agree when you don't, that you're fine when you're not, or that you lack direction when, in reality, you simply haven't expressed it. This misrepresentation slowly eats away at your sense of self, because the world isn't seeing the real you. Silence also creates an imbalance in relationships. When one person is always expressing, sharing, and leading the conversation while the other holds back, it doesn't create mutual respect. It creates hierarchy. The one who speaks is perceived as the leader, the one with influence, the one whose voice sets the tone. The one who stays quiet becomes the follower, the one who adjusts, the one whose role is defined by the other person's choices. Without realizing it, silence places you lower in the dynamics of power and importance, and the longer that imbalance continues, the harder it becomes to break free from it. There's also the inner damage silence causes. The more you withhold your voice, the more you begin to doubt whether it even matters. You convince yourself that your perspective won't change anything, that your emotions aren't worth bringing up, that keeping quiet is easier than risking rejection or conflict. But this slowly chips away at your self-respect. You can't truly feel proud of yourself when you know you're constantly shrinking back, hiding parts of who you are, and allowing others to define the narrative. And when you lose self-respect, it shows in your energy, in your body language, and in the way others treat you. People can sense when someone doesn't value their own voice, and they mirror that lack of value right back. What's worse is that silence, stretched over time, becomes a habit. At first, it feels like you're choosing peace or avoiding drama. But eventually, it becomes your default reaction even when speaking up would serve you. And once it becomes habit, breaking it feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural. You hesitate, you second, guess, you stay quiet once again, and the cycle continues. And in that cycle, your identity as someone with a strong, authentic presence slowly disappears in the eyes of others. But the truth is, your voice is not just sound. It is your identity, your power, your contribution to the world. Every time you speak with honesty, clarity, and confidence, you reinforce the reality of who you are. You remind others that you are a person with boundaries, opinions, and a unique perspective that deserves respect. When you stay silent, you surrender that power. You hand it over to others and allow them to shape how you are seen. This is why staying silent for too long causes people to stop taking you seriously and begin overlooking you altogether.